Hello, this is a tutorial about drawing portraits. This is the first time I've done a voiceover for one of my videos, so please excuse the poor audio quality. For the tutorial, I'll be explaining some tips for drawing portraits like basic anatomy, proportions, and style. I used Clip Studio Paint for this, and I'll talk about 3D models that come with Clip Studio that can help you get started. And if you do not use Clip Studio, you can still follow my tips in other art software or traditional mediums. Okay, let's start with some groundwork anatomy. Before I go on, I want to be clear that this is not the only way to go about this, nor are these proportions I show you the only correct way to draw a portrait. It's more like a guideline to start and help understand what makes up a face in simple parts, rather than trying to tackle drawing a face in all its details on the first try. It's easier to break it down and think of it as a basic shapes and the relationship between them instead. So I like to start with a rough circle for the top portion of the skull. Some people go ahead and draw a simplified shape for the whole head, and others focus on the eyes and the relationship between them and the rest of the person's features. Like I said, there's lots of approaches to this and none are wrong as long as you're drawing, learning, and having fun. After drawing the circle, I add some diagonal lines for the jaw and chin placement, then lightly erase the bottom part of the circle. Start adding in some lines to act as guides. I like using the line tool for this. Add one vertical down the middle of the face and one across horizontally, also about halfway. That line is roughly the placement of the eyes. Now to find the width of the eyes and the nose, if you divide the face into roughly 5 portions across, the center would be the nose width, and the portions on its left and right are the eyes. A little above that is the brow line. On to the mouth. The mouth's corners usually match up to the middle of the eyes, where you expect the pupils to be if looking straight ahead. Then the ears can vary a lot based on character, reference, or style. But based on average anatomy on a real person, they are placed a little below the brows and the bottom of the ears are almost level with the bottom of the nose. I lower the opacity of the sketch and the guideline layer, add a new layer above them, and do cleanup, and done. So that's basically my process for figuring out a person's facial features before drawing a portrait. And I don't follow that exactly every step every time I draw, but understanding those proportions and keeping them in mind will help you have a structure to base the rest of your work on, which really helps moving further into your artwork so you don't end up in a situation where you need to change too much of the groundwork when you're further than the sketch in production, or worse, have to start over entirely. Before I show you my process for drawing a portrait from reference, for those using Clip Studio, like me, I'd like to remind you about the included 3D models. They are super helpful for drawing really anything. I use them all the time. There are 3D posable models within your Materials menu that come with the program already. You can download more in your Assets window that others have made as well. There are 2 plain types of 3D models. Both come in male and female options. These are really neat because you can change them by rotating and posing different body parts, and you can control how the camera faces them. You can even add perspective and foreshortening to the character, which is useful for more dynamic poses. You can turn shading on or off depending on what you need, and you can change the light placement. This is useful for figuring out how light and shadow act on your character based on your scene. If you want a more stylized or anime-like look, you can change the proportions of the model's body as well as the head. You can also change their height, weight, and musculature. For this video, I'm focusing on the face. Here are some examples of what you can do with a 3D model to make handy references for drawing in a face in different angles and poses. If you use Clip Studio, I really recommend making use of these. Also, and I can't stress this enough, find and use references to help improve your art. Go online and search, take selfies, observe people around you, look at magazine photos. There's lots of options. There are 3D sculptures and figures you can also buy. Okay, on to drawing a portrait from reference. I'm using a photo of my lovely little sister. I look at the whole of the image and figure out how the features relate to each other. I start with basic shapes and leave details for later. Remember when drawing digitally to flip the canvas often and look for things that could be better. Like I mentioned earlier, I start by figuring out the shape of the skull and jaw and then the eyes. I try to focus on the simple shapes, and then build up from that. From there, I add hair, details, clothes, whatever. Backgrounds if I need. When I'm all done, I add a new layer on top, lower the opacity of the sketch, and on the new layer, clean up the drawing. Sometimes I will leave it more sketchy, like a pencil texture, and sometimes I'll ink it for a more clean, more stylized look. And that's basically my process for drawing a portrait from reference. Earlier, I talked about changing the proportions of the face for different art styles. Here are some examples, where I'm still using that same photo as a reference but changing how I draw the features. You can make the eyes larger, closer together, the nose smaller, the head bigger in proportion to the body, and more. There are many ways you can go about stylizing the anatomy. There's really no limit, but understanding those basic steps in anatomy helps even when you aren't trying to recreate photorealism. Well, that's it for this tutorial. Thank you for watching my video. I plan to make more tutorials and process videos like this in the future if anyone's interested. Drop a comment below if you have anything you'd like to see or learn about. Thank you, goodbye!